Cypherpunks were a group of technologists, programmers, cryptographers that came together in California. They were very interested in the internet. First of all, the internet was new. We're talking about the early 90s, a frontier of techies that were starting to experiment with it and explore this new information superhighway. Tim May, John Gilmore, and Aaron Hughes were some of them. They had this vision for the internet, but they kind of had two visions. They thought the internet is a great tool, but it could lead to a dystopian future, really. It could lead to a future where everything you do online is monitored, analyzed, and potentially censored. It's pretty close to the current reality.
Was there one economic or political event that kind of riled up this group to get together back in the 80s or 90s? Was it a progression of anti-privacy events that kind of...
There was something called a Clipper chip developed by the NSA, and they wanted Americans to have it in their phones. And it would encrypt their communication, but it would also have a backdoor for the NSA itself, so they could still listen into your communication. So the Cypherpunks, they were founded before this happened, and it was under the Clinton administration this started, and they started to really fight back against this. So Adam Back, for example, he had a shirt printed that had the PGP algorithm printed on it. Which is the letter to code, was printed on the t-shirt. And the idea was, if you wear this t-shirt and you leave the United States, then you're technically a weapons exporter. So it's sort of which was under the law too, so it was sort of to make the point of how absurd these laws were. So the Cypherpunks set out to prevent this future, essentially. They wanted to protect privacy in a digital age. And they wanted to do that through cryptography. The governments sort of have the monopoly over money. They control the money supply in a big way. They benefit from having that power. So why would governments allow that? Well, the incentives don't align for governments to allow competition at all. The way to actually accomplish that is to build a form of money that governments cannot stop. People have been trying to develop digital cash for a while, and Bitcoin kind of is an evolution of these attempts.
The people that have the monopoly on the money, what scheme could they use to end this?
To end Bitcoin?
Yeah.
To attack Bitcoin? Oh, I don't want to give them any ideas. I think one of the big problems, and Mark is trying to solve that with his company, but one of the big problems for Bitcoin, like one of the big fundamental problems, is mining centralization. If mining becomes centralized, Bitcoin can be regulated in ways that, defeats the value proposition. So my name is Aaron van Wirdum. I'm from the Netherlands. I've been writing about Bitcoin. I'm a journalist, and I've been writing about Bitcoin for over 10 years now. For most of these years, that was affiliated for Bitcoin magazine. And I don't know how many of you know about this, but one of the things I covered a lot was the block size wars, for example. This was a time in Bitcoin's history a couple of years ago when there was a big debate on sort of what is the vision for Bitcoin, what are the trade-offs that we want to make for Bitcoin. So I was covering that a lot. It was sort of about the future of Bitcoin, like where is Bitcoin going. But I'm also a historian, so I studied history. And I studied history because I thought the best way to sort of understand the world, or understand where we are, is to understand where it all came from. And I wanted to apply the same logic to Bitcoin. So I decided to write a book called the Genesis book, and it's like the origin story of Bitcoin. So it tells the story of the people and projects that inspired Bitcoin.
Sideways.
Indeed, like Matthew said, Bitcoin didn't come out of nowhere. That's still sort of a common myth, I would call it. Instead, people had been trying to develop digital cash for a while, and Bitcoin kind of is an evolution of these attempts. So the book, the Genesis book, which is called the Genesis book because the first block that was ever mined for Bitcoin is called the Genesis block, so it's a play on the first block, the Genesis book. The Genesis book has two storylines. For the most, it starts out with two different storylines. So the first storyline is about economics, and specifically Hayek was an economist from Austria, free market economist, and he for much of his career, he spent his time thinking about money. And these ideas are very relevant to Bitcoin. So there's sort of different phases in his career. Initially, there was during the Great Depression, he had a big debate with Keynes, specifically on how money should work or how the economy should be managed in general, and it included how money should work. And what he described as sort of as a neutral form of money was a form of money that had a limited supply and that could be used globally. So a money without borders and with a fixed supply, so you couldn't print more. He thought that's the best way to do money. That's the best way to sort of measure value, and measuring value. So money sort of as a ruler in a way. Like if you have a ruler and you want to build a house and the ruler changes in size, then you're going to end up with a crooked house. Well, if it has a fixed size, you have a stable way of measuring value even over time. So he thought a neutral form of money was at least the most clean way of, organizing the economy. But he didn't know how to do it. He thought it couldn't be done. One of the reasons he thought it couldn't be done is because you need some institution to manage this. You need some, central bank or anything like that, some institution that makes sure that this money works. But this institution has to be based somewhere and can ultimately be either corrupted or taken over, or in the case of emergencies like war, countries really have to trust this institution. But if you're at war with a country that has this institution, then this country might abuse that power. So there was sort of a fundamental mistrust between countries that made it impossible to have this kind of money. Now later in his career, he had a different idea. He said, okay, actually the best way to do it is to leave it to the free market. So let the free market figure out what is the best form of money. Just let people for themselves decide what kind of money they want to use. And that way the best form of money will, through the market, emerge. So we don't need some sort of top-down institution. We don't need a government to tell us what kind of money we use. We just let banks experiment, issue whatever money they want, and then people will adopt it. So in the same way that anything else in the free market works. Just let it be free. Let people decide what they want to use. Now that problem was that solution was also problematic because it would at least require governments to allow it. Right? Governments sort of have the monopoly over money. They control the money supply in a big way, and so they benefit from having that power. So why would governments allow that? Well, the incentives don't align for governments to allow competition at all. So then I said, really the only way to do it is, he still believed in this idea of leaving into the free market, but the way to actually accomplish that is to build a form of money that governments cannot stop. So even if governments don't agree with it, hey, it's there, they can't stop it. So this ties in with the other storyline. So the other storyline is the more technical side of the book. I'll skip some parts. Let's see what's a fairly natural point to jump in. I'm obviously leaving a lot of information out. That goes without saying. But a natural jumping off point here are the cypherpunks. So the cypherpunks were a group of technologists, programmers, cryptographers that came together in California. It was founded by Tim May, Eric Hughes, and John Gilmore. And they were very interested in the internet. First of all, the internet was new. We're talking about the early 90s. So personal computers were new, and the internet was even newer. There was like a frontier of techies that were starting to experiment with it and explore this new information superhighway. And Tim May, John Gilmore, and Eric Hughes were some of them. But they had this vision for the internet, but they kind of had two visions. They thought the internet is a great tool, but it could lead to a dystopian future, really. It could lead to a future where everything you do online is monitored, analyzed, and potentially censored. So every message you send, every website you visit, every transaction you make, a government or maybe someone else can be looking into what you're doing and spying on you it's like this Orwellian future that they were worried about.
And that's exactly what's played out in a lot of ways.
It's pretty close to the current reality.
Yeah. Many of you have been watching on X and seeing what Google's doing. I've been following this for a couple of years, but recently it's starting to get more exposure. Social engineering, the abuse of your private data to feed you a certain narrative. They know everything you've ever searched. They know what moves you, what you think about. They know, certain political issues that might be able to get you to switch your vote because you're passionate about this. So they will push propaganda, do all these things. A big popular thing right now is on Google. If you type in, assassination or whatever, they've censored essentially Trump's assassination from the internet, the assassination attempt on him. So, it won't auto-suggest. And then if you type in, you can try it on your phones right now if you use Google products, and you can type in, censorship, and then what pops up is, why is censorship good? Censorship is good because it's this idea of leading you, subtly manipulating you, and it's very insidious, right? So Google used to have this motto that said, "Don't be evil." That was part of their core mission, and I don't know why a company would ever need to remove that motto from their ethos, right? But they in fact did do that, right? So what they're doing right now, in my opinion, is evil. It is a way to propagandize and manipulate people instead of just being objective, right? So, but back to what he's saying, the cypherpunks at large they saw the way the internet was set up, and they largely predicted a lot of the things that are playing out today, right? So, and he'll get to what their biggest mission was, but it had to do with a digital or a free money.
Yeah, so the cypherpunks set out to prevent this future, essentially. They wanted to protect privacy in a digital age. And they wanted to do that through cryptography. So cryptography, there'd been a revolution in the field of cryptography like 15 years prior, and all sorts of innovations came from it. But these innovations existed within the realm of like universities and academic papers and conferences, but it wasn't actually used by people yet. So the cypherpunks decided to change that, and they were going to build these tools. So they were going to actually code up the tools and distribute it for everyone to use. So they built encryption tools so you could message each other privately. They built email remailers so you could hide who's emailing who or even who's emailing you. And they wanted to create digital cash. So a way to pay each other on the internet without it revealing who's paying who, hiding the identity. So much like physical cash, if you pay someone, no one else in the world needs to know that that payment was made. And even the cashier doesn't need to know who you are. You just give the money and that's it. So they wanted to create something like that, but for cyberspace, for the internet, a digital form of cash. So they started to experiment with that. There were a number of projects that they developed, and they all have like an attribute that you now find in Bitcoin. So the first one was eCash, but DigiCash. There was a startup in Amsterdam, where I'm from. We're very close. And that was the first digital cash project that was ever developed, and it had its strong privacy features. Then you had Hashcash, which was developed by Aaron Back. This was like a postage scheme for the internet. So if you would send an email, you would attach a little bit of cash essentially, and this was generated with computing power. So you would tie real-world resources, computing power, energy, to something digital, and that's how you would prove that you actually paid something to send an email. And this was to counter spam. Then this concept, proof of work, as it's called, was then used, or at least, was used in a proposal by Nick Szabo called BitGold, and he thought of a way to send this proof of work to each other using public key cryptography, so you could actually own it, and because the postage scheme was like one-time use, like postage, right? And then BitGold, you could actually reuse it and resend it to other people. You could actually have circulating cash. Then there was B-Money, which was developed by WideEye, and that introduced the idea of full nodes, essentially, in a way. Like people would actually become a part of the network. Everyone would run their own piece of the software. That's how everyone would keep everyone honest. And you had a project called RPow by Halvini, and that really used open source software. So you could check the software with your own eyes, essentially, and check that everything was going according to the rules, and therefore that no one could cheat, and exactly how the system worked. So all of these things ended up in Bitcoin in some way or another. So Bitcoin, of course, was introduced in 2009 by Satoshi Nakamoto, most people will know. And he really, the way to look at it is he sort of took all these different pieces of the puzzle all these different properties that these different digital cash systems had. And he, for the first time now, really laid it together, and he developed a system that both worked technically and it aligned the incentives quite brilliantly. For example, by introducing this 21 million limit on the coins, now there is actually a strong game theoretical incentive to get some of these coins. Some of these other digital cash projects didn't have that. They had themselves a form of inflation. So there was no real reason to use it. And then no one else, if you're not using it, then no one can pay you. And that works for everyone, right? So if I have this cash but no one else is using it, it's completely useless. So that it lacks this sort of incentive to actually start using it. Well, Bitcoin with Satoshi Nakamoto, when he invented it with this limit, so now there's actually a reason for people to start using it. And that's how adoption could sort of naturally start to emerge, which we have seen happening over the past, 15 years. So that's in a nutshell sort of the backstory. Now, of course, there's a lot more in the book, and also if people have questions, very happy to answer it. Mette, did you want to answer?
I was going to say this concept of absolute scarcity that you described was, largely came from this idea of studying the history of money and different commodities, etc. I think one of the biggest innovations Satoshi had was this idea of absolute scarcity, right? Because even precious metals, they're not absolutely scarce. You can, eventually we'll be able to find them on other planets or asteroids or whatever, right? Maybe we get better technology that we can get deeper into the earth and extract way more gold and inflate the supply eventually. I mean, these are all things that are possible, except in Bitcoin, you have this idea of it's mathematically enshrined in the code of absolute scarcity, right? And that idea was one of, Satoshi's innovations. So it's important to understand this from a economic lens, but he's touching on the cryptography stuff, but there's also this economic lens. And Satoshi was this true expert genius in both these fields, in all of these fields. And he was very educated in all these different areas. And he tied all of these things together to allow the game theory to play out how you're seeing it, which is today we've got, probably the next president of the United States saying he wants to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve, right? So, here we are.
Very good question. You're on the table.
Sorry.
No, that's great.
No, so having a monopoly on money is a pretty powerful thing. It's probably not much more powerful on the planet than, being able to create money and use it to your own ends. What do you perceive is the greatest threat from those that have a monopoly on the money?
What's the greatest threats from the money being monopolized?
The people that have the monopoly on the money, what scheme could they use to end this?
So, to end Bitcoin?
Yeah.
To attack Bitcoin? I don't want to give him any ideas.
Yeah.
But I think one of the big problems, and Mark is trying to solve that with his company, but one of the big problems for Bitcoin, like one of the big fundamental problems, is mining centralization. The reason that Bitcoin is censorship resistant is because there's no single party that controls which transactions go into the blockchain. This is distributed. Like anyone can sort of become a miner and do that. However, in practice, so it happens everywhere across the world, right, on people's computers. So it's very hard to regulate that. While if it's a company, it's easy to regulate. So that it's very crucial that Bitcoin remains decentralized in that way. What we've seen happening, however, is that more and more mining happens through mining pools. So then miners, they basically bundle their hash power and they share the reward if they find something. Because if you don't do that, if you just have a miner, you're running a miner, then you're only gonna find a block maybe every once in 10 years, or depending on how much machine power you have. But not very often, so you can't run it as a business. You can't, participating in a lottery is not a business. So to turn it into a business, to create a more stable income stream, mining pools were invented, so people bundle their hash power. But the problem then is that this mining pool, whoever operates that, then that person or that company is deciding which transaction is going. So if there's only like 5 mining pools, then Bitcoin can be regulated again. The regulators have to only find these 5 mining pools, and they can say, hey, don't include this transaction in the block. Don't let this person transact. And that's the problem that Bitcoin is really trying to solve, something that governments can't stop, right? But there is, there's potential of solving this problem. And again, Mark with Ocean is one of the companies working on that, to bring this power of transaction selection back to the individual miners. So it becomes more decentralized again. But yeah, in general, I would say the number one problem for Bitcoin is mining centralization. If mining becomes centralized, Bitcoin can be regulated in ways that, you know, defeats the value proposition.
So think about a pool, like all of us are miners, right? We each have a computer. And, you know, only one of us is going to win every 10 minutes, right? But if we share, if one of us wins, we all split those rewards evenly amongst us. We'll have that stable income. So every 10 minutes, we're going to be getting paid. Whereas if we don't do it that way, it might be hours before one of us wins, right? You might not have income for hours. Well, Bitcoin mining is similar to that. But just think, you know, you might not get paid for weeks or days or months, right? Until you do hit that huge chunk of reward, you get the privilege of mining that new block. So a pool solves that and will give you that stable daily income, which is important, you know, for businesses or to operate for many people, right? You know, this idea and these concepts, we'll have you guys listen to. I mean, Aaron's here because we're going to record the very first episode of our new podcast, Cypherpunk. So it'll be like a good 10 episodes. So you guys can really come down the rabbit hole. And Mark and I just recorded an episode where we talk a lot about this as well. So you can go down much further in the rabbit hole of your question there.
Yeah. And how would the attack come?
So the attack would basically come by a government agent knocking on the mining operator's door and says, you got to stop. You can no longer include this transaction in blocks because otherwise you're going to jail. That's how the attack would happen in a nutshell.
When Satoshi designed Bitcoin, the whole idea behind it was, you know, one CPU, one vote, which essentially means, for each person, individual, you have your own vote. The way the pool works is we all pool together, but whoever's running the pool gets to decide each one of our votes, right? So that's kind of the concept and the idea. And what Mark is working on is what we call version 2 of pool templates, called Stratum V2. It's a variation of that, where the way that pools work now is it gives a lot of power to whoever is, running the pool. And what Mark and Ocean Mining are working on is basically, you'll still have a pool, you'll still work together, but each individual miner can run whatever template they want. They can operate however they get to vote their own decision, right? So theoretically, if everything's done properly, if government wants to regulate, they come to Mark and say, hey, we want your pool. You've got all these miners. We want you to censor these transactions from these addresses. Mark is going to turn around and say, I can't do that because that's not how our pool works. We're decentralized. Each miner has their own vote. I couldn't do it even if I wanted to. That's the thought process, right?
Just to kind of back up to appreciate context a little, when Bitcoin first launched, people were able to mine Bitcoin on cell phones, right? Like the hash rate was so low that any device would pretty much suffice. That as long as you had some level of electricity and internet connection, right? So today, because of the game theory behind how Bitcoin was developed, how the software was coded, that difficulty becomes more, that increases with each halving. Is that how it works?
No, every 2,000 blocks.
Every 2,000 blocks.
The difficulty adjusts, but the idea is that when the network was first born, there was only a couple of cypherpunk enthusiasts keeping track of the network, right? There was no financial value there. And the network was you could make the argument centralized, right? Because it was Satoshi and Alfini and, maybe 10 or 20 or 30 other people that were just interested in the technology and proving the concept, right? But as that network, as Bitcoin got a market price, there was now a financial game theory incentive for more people to participate.
With more powerful computers.
Yeah. Over time, yes. And Satoshi didn't anticipate that happening. But this idea of as the value of the network grows, there's a signal to the market, hey, we need more security, which is what the miners provide, the electrical security of that network. So now we're at a point where the network is, worth trillions. And there's miners all over the world that are continually coming online. You're getting more and more security around this network. So, Bitcoin bootstraps its security as the value of that network grows, which is a brilliant game theoretical design. This was all well thought out by Satoshi.
So in the beginning, it was incentivizing anyone to participate, right? Because it wanted adoption. And today is still the case, but because of how far along we are, there's been 19 million coins mined already?
19.7.
19.7. Panda got the stats. So it's incredible how fast that has already happened. And now these massive mining companies are competing for the little that's left. But because it's truly scarce, so scarcity doesn't exist in nature, right? That's not a concept we're familiar with. So this is the first time that there's truly actually a commodity that's scarce.
Absolutely scarce.
Absolutely scarce. Yes. And so because of that, these massive companies have invested billions and billions of dollars into hardware, ASIC miners, which are very special Bitcoin designed miners that are, just have one purpose, just to go full steam ahead, processing transactions, exploring blocks, solving these problems that Satoshi programmed into the game theory of Bitcoin. And one thing I always hear is like, what happens when quantum computers come onto the market, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a question I'd love for y'all to answer. Like, when quantum computers come into the equation, is that going to mean that the difficulty factor increases to match that capability? Or yes. So then, therefore, they'll be the only ones capable of mining?
It would, as far as I understand, just be a new type of ASIC, you could say.
Yeah.
And then they start to compete against each other.
Yeah.
So, Bitcoin, at least in that sense, would still be fine. The difficulty would just go up a lot.
Yeah.
The bigger risk is the breaking the key pairs.
Yes, exactly. So some coins are protected in such a way that they could be stolen with quantum computers. It could be stolen. They could be taken. So that's a problem that would have to be solved. There are probably ways to solve that, but even if we figure out how to do that, the coins would have to be moved to these new addresses to sort of secure them. Mm-hmm. Now that could mean that for all the coins where the keys are lost, that aren't secured in this way. Mm-hmm. So
that's interesting.
They could potentially be mined again. Or stolen again.
Just so y'all realize, the way quantum computers could unlock these seed phrases is because there's only 1,000 words, and it's a variety of how many words?
So when you have a public and private key, it's a long string of numbers and letters.
12 words.
With traditional computing, we were talking about a seed phrase, but I'll simplify it even more, because if you just generate a Bitcoin address, it's just, your public address is just a bunch of numbers and letters. And your private key, which is essentially what allows you to spend those coins, right, is a bunch of numbers and letters. I think it's 16 or I don't know exactly how long that thread is, 16 or 30 seconds. It's long, right? Where traditional computers right now, you could never in a million years guess what that private key would be, right? That's what allows, the cryptography is what allows you to truly have self-custody of that Bitcoin, right? Having that private key that's impossible to crack unless somebody else sees it or you give it to them, right? What we're saying now is that potentially in the future, there might be a supercomputer that's using quantum computing that, changes the game in the sense of it can guess that 16 or 32 digit long, randomized password, right? Because it would run so many simulations. It might take, 10 days of just guessing to figure it out, but it would be a potential attack vector. So the answer would be, we would switch to what we call a quantum resistant, algorithm, right? Where even a quantum computer couldn't guess that. Because remember, each time you add a number or a letter to this long chain, it becomes exponentially harder to generate and guess the,
And the beauty is they'll factor in the electricity cost of having, right? Yes. That's another factor. That's why the Bitcoin chain is safe from spam, right? You can get thousands of spam emails because, it's fairly cheap to it's practically free to send those out, right? But on the Bitcoin network, there's a gas fee associated, which makes every transaction one that has value attached to that. So no one can just spam the network. Same with the quantum wallets, right? Somebody to be able to pull that off would have to spend so much money, and they might not achieve it, that it's not really worth it. But I didn't want to get off course. I just started.
Yeah, there's dusting attacks.
Dusting attacks?
Yeah, people do dust attacks on wallets.
What's a dust attack?
Basically, they're just sending you like a small little transaction to a wallet. They usually do it to the bigger wallets to try to identify and figure out who it is. So that's been going on for years.
They send a small transaction and they follow...
Yeah, like 800 Satoshis, 600 Satoshis.
And they follow where it goes to?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that happens all the time.
You just spoke with Jameson Lobb about.
Bitcoin is rolling out, incremental improvements that everybody's adopting through through Bitcoin Core, SegWit, more privacy preserving things. So I think, that, again, I'm not super technical, I'm not super down that rabbit hole, but some of that might help with stuff like dusting attacks, if I remember hearing correctly about that. Do you have any deep technical insights on that?
Yeah, I mean, in general, the privacy properties of Bitcoin are not perfect. That's just the reality right now. So you can sort of track coins over the chain. That's not a technically accurate way to put it, but it's close enough to get your idea. So that's a problem, at least if you care about privacy, which I do, and which I believe Satoshi did, and was sort of the original intent of Bitcoin to offer his electronic cash with privacy features of cash. So Bitcoin is not perfect in that sense, unfortunately. It's a work in progress, and there are all kinds of improvements in the works to make that better. And more is, smart developers and programmers are thinking of ways to improve it, and they have been improving it. And I believe it will continue to improve. Now, will it ever be as perfect as, a dollar bill, a piece of paper that you pass around? Maybe, maybe not, but it is at least, and even paper bills, you might have serial numbers. So even with paper bills, it's not 100% private. It could potentially be tracked where dollars are taken out of an ATM and where they're spent again, or where they're deposited. So, but anyways, Bitcoin is not perfect in the sense of privacy anyways, but it's a work in progress, and progress has been made and will continue to be made, I think.
Is it not perfect because we KYC with?
I mean, that's a big part of the problem.
Yeah.
That's a big part of the problem, yeah, because a lot of people, when they use Bitcoin, they kind of just get it from an exchange and then send back to an exchange. And because every exchange does the KYC AML, identity checks, that makes it relatively easy to follow who's doing what on the chain. While if Bitcoin would actually start to circulate peer-to-peer, person to person, like a dollar bill, like in an economy, it just is spent from one person to the next, then it becomes much harder to follow which person, which identity actually,
Its original purpose, right? The way it was supposed to.
And hopefully the future. Wait, what's that?
To the person to person. Like this, it's like I get paid in some of that, but I'm leaving it on the chain. So then how do you use it? It's like you have to go get another job that has cash money or a paycheck. So how
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
so if there's money on the chain
Yeah.
and you get paid on the chain,
Mm-hmm.
to take it off since it's not regulated or whatnot.
Well, you can't take it off the blockchain.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is always on the blockchain.
She means to off ramp to fiat, right?
So
now to pay her bills, she essentially has to.
You have to sell it.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
So you have two options. One option is, you send it to the Bitcoin Coinbase and you sell it to somebody who wants to buy Bitcoin, and they broker that deal and you get US dollars. The other option is come to a Bitcoin meetup, come somewhere where you can interact and exchange peer-to-peer. Hey, Maddie, I'm coming. And
I know someone that wants to buy Bitcoin. Red shirt.
there you go. So he wants to buy some Bitcoin peer-to-peer. You want to sell $1,000 worth of Bitcoin, you give him $1,000, he sends it to your wallet. I mean, there's no other better way to do it, right?
Yeah.
That was the intention. So
Yeah. And ideally, eventually, hopefully, stores will just accept it, and your landlord will accept it, and you can just, you don't have to get the fiat currency out of an exchange. You can just spend it.
And I think objectively over time, we've seen more transactions.
What would be the easiest way to create those peer-to-peer transactions? What facilitates that? An easy way to facilitate a Bitcoin transaction.
Just look across the table and talk to Mondrell over here and see Bitcoin you want to settle. Or let's see, see, come to a meetup.
Just hypothetically, I'm saying physically, how does that transaction take place? What's the easiest way to make that transaction take place? You have to have a device or something.
Just a smart device, right? Bitcoin wallet.
And you're using a wallet. You're using
It could be a hot wallet, cold wallet, whatever you desire, right?
Yeah, you can just install a wallet on your phone, and if both of you have that, then you can sort of hold the phones to each other, scan the QR code, and that's how the transaction is made.
Do wallets shoot out tax statements?
No, maybe not.
Oh,
And it's your responsibility.
Just thought I'd ask.
Coinbase might do that. If you send it to your Coinbase custodial wallet and then you sell it, they are going to generate a report for you. So if your intention is to be by the book, then using an exchange that offers that service is probably your best bet for you, right?
Did you have a question?
Yeah, so your question reminded me of some of the stories of early, like, back alley Bitcoin deals that went down. And I've heard of stories of people having to show up to like a Starbucks in the UK with a suitcase full of cash, and sitting down at the table and getting Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So I was curious from Aaron, what is your like, shadiest Bitcoin deal you've ever done? Back alley.
Maybe you shouldn't comment on that on camera. No, when I got in Bitcoin, there were already exchanges that I could use. Bitstamp was around, Bitonic and Netherlands was around. So I never had to do anything too complicated personally to buy or sell Bitcoin.
Free Ross.
Back in the day, it was a lot of that stuff was on the IRC and with Silk Road and stuff like that. I don't need to be on camera for that.
Free Ross.
But yeah, that was back in the day. People would be willing to meet you with a suitcase full of cash, and it was shady as fuck sometimes.
There was local Bitcoins. I think they shut that down, but there's a couple other services that do offer this thing where you can meet people and facilitate a deal, and there's a verification system. So your person has reviews. They've got 100 reviews, and they're 4.99 stars, right? It's like, all right, this person they have a reputation I can link up with and do a deal. And then you can meet in a bank, you can meet in front of a police station, you could meet in places in public where you feel safe, right? So
I know in Cuba there are Telegram groups. You want a Telegram and say I want to buy or sell such and such amount of Bitcoin, and then somebody will get on there and say, I got it. I'll meet you at such and such place, and it just is meetup like that. So I don't know about any Telegram groups in the United States for peer-to-peer Bitcoin.
You're gonna pass on.
So, anybody else? Who's got questions?
I have a question for Aaron. Are you familiar with sophomore Jason Lowry's thesis, and what is your opinion of it?
I'm familiar with it. I haven't read it.
It's tough to read.
Yeah, it's a big book, right? Also not very cheap, I believe.
Well, I might know somebody that could get you a copy. Apparently banned the book. So
$30,000.
I actually had to seek out Jason myself to send me the book. So I do have a version that I'm allowed to share with people if they so desire.
What did you it?
That's a good question. Why would you ban a book? I mean, it's not kind of crazy. Like, it's literally the U.S. government basically censored the book, because he is he works in the military, right? So kind of crazy, kind of a wild. That's a good one to go down eventually. Hopefully, if he comes and talks to the guy, he won't end up dead.
What is the brief story of it?
War will be waged in cyberspace and not between two.
It's also a lot about the game theory,
Right.
and how things are playing out with Bitcoin on a, macro stage with nations and governments, and it's very interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
Go on.
Beginner questions are fine.
Yeah.
Don't hold back.
As you mentioned, like Bitcash or eCash and BitHash and all those other cryptocurrencies before Bitcoin. Has Bitcoin just rendered all those useless, or are some of those still in existence and maybe could be used in the future?
Well, two of them didn't actually exist. They were proposals, but they were incomplete proposals. So Bitgold and B-Money, they didn't exist. They were more like rough drafts, but they had some good ideas, but they were never actually implemented. eCash by DigiCash went bankrupt. There was just no demand for it really. But eCash technology is being reinvented or reused now on Bitcoin. So now there are startups on Bitcoin that use that same technology to, for example, offer that same privacy level. So now you can use eCash on Bitcoin. Hashcash, that was never really money in the first place, right? It was more like postage for email. that never caught on, although I think there are some niche applications that use something like it. I mean, and of course Bitcoin itself and other cryptocurrencies. But that was never really money. And then ARPAO by Hal Finney, that also never took off. So it existed, it could be used, but it just never gained any steam. By the way, there are some other digital cash projects that people were working on, and I do mention a couple more in the Genesis book. But the five that I highlighted, the five I mentioned, are sort of the biggest, they had the biggest innovation or inspiration for Bitcoin, I think. So yeah, no, it's not like Bitcoin competed with these other digital cash systems really. It's more that these failed on their own and then Satoshi finally kind of got it right.
Mm-hmm. Satoshi built on some, good ideas for each system, right? So you took something useful from this system that solved a certain problem and failed over here. And then this system solved another problem and kind of pieced all these things together while continuing to solve, other problems like the Byzantine generals problem, for example.
Yeah.
How, Aaron, I have a good question for you. How would you explain the Byzantine generals problem to, basically the plebs, just the average Joe, the layman's way to explain that? I've struggled with that personally, being able to really explain that in a way that just finding the right analogies to present. Maybe you can take a crack at that.
Yeah, I mean, the best analogy is maybe the actual original analogy of the Byzantine generals.
Yeah.
So the story here is that there are generals and they want to attack a city. And so they got the city surrounded and they want to attack the city. But the attack will only succeed if they all attack at the same time. If only half of them attack and the others don't, the others retreat or they don't, then the attack will fail. So it's really important that everyone does the same thing. They need to either all attack or all not attack. That's really, anything else is a problem for them. So how do they do that? They need to communicate, but they surrounded the city so they can't all directly communicate with each other. So they have to sort of indirectly communicate, either through carriers or something like that. And then everyone needs to know that you can only attack if everyone else is also going to attack. So if you get a message that says, okay, we're going to attack, how do you know that everyone else got the same message? You would need to get sort of a confirmation from other generals that we're indeed going to attack. But then if that other general sends the confirmation, how does that other general know that you got the confirmation? So now that general needs like a confirmation of the confirmation, but now you don't know if the general got the confirmation of confirmation. So now you would need a confirmation. You get the idea. There's no way to know for sure that everyone has the same information and then you can attack. So that's the Byzantine general's problem. So it's like, how do you find consensus on a decentralized network? So that problem translates to computers and Bitcoin. Like everyone needs to agree on what is the state of the ledger. Everyone needs to agree these transactions happened and these did not. This is what everyone owns right now. But how do you do that if there's no, if there's a central party that says, okay, now we're going to attack and everyone can see that person, there's one general standing on a mountain, then it works. But if it's decentralized, people can see each other, they have to communicate indirectly, then it doesn't, it falls apart. So that's sort of the big problem that had to be solved. And Satoshi didn't technically solve it completely, but he solved it approximately. So the way he solved it is, we're all going to follow the chain with the most hash power. So we're going to share blocks, and then whatever blockchain is the longest, that's what everyone will settle on. So as soon as you see a longer block, then you know, okay, that's the chain we're going to follow. That's the chain I'm going to follow, because I'm going to assume that's the chain everyone's following. So that's why you want to wait for 6 confirmations before you accept a transaction. So you're really sure from, okay, it's now been an hour, I still haven't seen another chain. I still haven't seen a chain that's longer. Now it's safe to assume that this is just going to be the longer chain, and we're yellow.
Go ahead.
I have some questions and fears in my mind about Bitcoin, which I didn't have when I first started investing in it, because I see things are going. So maybe all of you are far more knowledgeable than I am, so maybe you can help me. My questions, or my concerns, are that I see people like BlackRock buying tons and tons of it, and other organizations, countries. So how is this going to relate for us as private investors? Are we going to take control, having more than the average person? And I'm just seeing things that I'm concerned about because I don't know in what ways they can take over or be in charge or whatever.
Well, you want to take this
You
one?
can have-
Step it.
I mean, I can answer, but you go
Because in the
ahead.
beginning, there was no BlackRock involved. And now I see ETFs
So
and they're not holding custody.
Bitcoin operates in a controlled by consensus mechanism called proof of work. What that means is that
What?
proof of work. Okay? So the way proof of work operates, the miners all over the world, they are publishing the next block. Simply owning Bitcoin gives you no control of the system whatsoever. You could have half the Bitcoin that all exist, but you would have no control over that blockchain. The only control you would have would be to buy or to sell, right? So you could sell, and we saw some German government in the past couple of weeks. They dumped billions of dollars. They sold all their Bitcoin. And guess what? It's all gone now. They can't do anything else. All they can do is, in the very short term, affect the short term price with massive sell pressure on the market. That is the only control you have by owning a large portion of Bitcoin, right? And the market will absorb that. And then guess what? Now it's more distributed to people. People are buying it and getting a little bit of a cheaper price. They're coming to the market, they're buying it. And now it's becoming more distributed, right? So the only control you get from holding Bitcoin in an ETF or whatever is the ability to sell that Bitcoin. That's really the only control. But you have zero control over how the market works. Now, this is different than something called proof of stake, which is how Ethereum operates now, right? They switched over to proof of stake, which theoretically, right, the whole current system that exists right now is like basically proof of stake. The more money, the more power, et cetera, right? So you are staking your collateral to basically operate the system, right? Proof of stake, you run a node, you pledge your collateral, and you're going to be an honest participant. But if you were to accumulate so much that you could essentially work with, other large stakeholders, you could censor and do a lot of things by just having that collateral. With Bitcoin, in order to control the network, you have to control over half of all the electrical energy of machines in the whole world that are currently protecting that network. And even then, it's only a chance to make some minor changes. You can't go back in time and change anything that already happened. You could just, have 10 minutes or 20 minutes of not including a transaction or double spending a transaction. And the amount of electricity and energy that you'd spend to do that would be, so catastrophic that it would just make zero sense to attempt to do something like that, right? So the game theory really protects the system in a way that proof of work protects the system in a way that I don't believe proof of stake gives you that same level of decentralization. Now, it may work, it may still be a good system and an option, but the way Bitcoin operates is just not really possible. So just owning a bunch of Bitcoin gives you zero control.
Right.
Aside from status and, you can flex, I've got all this Bitcoin with my sailor, but
Right.
that's all it gives
But
you.
what you just hit upon, how they had all these Bitcoin and then they dumped it. It affected everybody that had Bitcoin. It's sort of like the stock market, people selling and the market goes down and then it goes up and down. So I was concerned, is it going to be a situation like that where people that are whales and that have a massive amount and then whenever they feel like dumping it, they dump it and this is going to go on forever, up, down, up, down, up, down with the price. I know it gets absorbed.
Yes.
Other people, I understand that other people are buying, but is this going to go on for a long period of time where they just?
Well, I think part of
And
the
I
group.
didn't understand why grayscale so low is.
Because of the fees.
So
Fees.
Grayscale is just it's a vehicle. So it's not like Grayscale itself owns all that Bitcoin, right? Those are customers, you, me, who might have a share of that. So they have thousands of individuals that own a portion of that trust,
They
right?
had to dump their Bitcoin for some reason.
Yeah, because people
People are
sold.
selling their
They
Bitcoin.
sold their Bitcoin.
Well, no, they sold their grayscale shares, which forced them to sell the Bitcoin that they were holding for those people.
Yeah, so Bitcoin, so it's not like Grayscale itself owns
Because
all
their
that.
customers.
They are just providing a custodial service for a group of people that have 401ks or Roth IRAs or stock brokerage accounts that don't want to interact with Bitcoin on the protocol level. They just want the price exposure. So it's not like Grayscale owns all that Bitcoin. The people decide what they're going to do if they want to sell.
Right.
And the reason a lot of the selling occurred is because Grayscale is keeping their high fee on that Bitcoin. So they charge every year, 2.5% or 2% or whatever it is to the people for the privilege of doing that, right? Well, when the SEC came in and actually did their job, which was they got sued and shit, but to actually allow efficient allocation of capital in markets, they allow other competitors to essentially come in and form an ETF, right? And cheaper fees for the customer. So we had to sue them in court for them to do their job, which is to facilitate orderly and efficient markets, right? So now you've got a much more efficient market where there's all these competitors instead of just one entity holding all that Bitcoin, the only option for people that have 401ks. Now we've got 50 different options, and it can compete and it can be efficient. And guess who wins at the end of the day? All of the people that are allocated in these different ETFs that just want the price exposure. And now you've got more options. So one entity can't, be beholden to whoever, right?
So it's not, what we're saying is that BlackRock owning all, billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin isn't going to be able to control anything.
No. So there's levels to this, right? The first level is, it's not like BlackRock owns all that Bitcoin. They are holding it for customers, right? Thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people are the ones who are buying those BlackRock shares. BlackRock is just charging a fee to essentially, offer that custodial service. Now, if a government comes to BlackRock and says, here's your gun, we're seizing all of your customers' Bitcoin, that is a legitimate, attack vector, right? Because, what is BlackRock going to do? They're a regulated company. They're going to say, don't kill me, okay. That's why it's so important. What we talk about here is, why help you guys set up your ledgers, all those things. Have self-custody of your Bitcoin so that is not an attack vector, right? It's okay if you have, I have a Roth IRA, I have, these shares of these different ETFs, right? And it's because it's in a tax advantage retirement account, and it's another option, right? I don't put all my eggs in that basket, right? Realize that there is a potential attack vector there, right? But even if they go see, even if the U.S. government goes and seizes all that Bitcoin for these ETFs and confiscates it from people, like they did with gold in 1924, whatever it was, 30, whatever they did, 32 maybe. Even if they go do that, right, you still have your self-custody Bitcoin, right? Now, I don't think that's a highly likely thing, but it is a risk to consider for the convenience that you're getting being able to do that, right? But
the other concern that I have is, and I've heard you say many times, have your Bitcoin in a whole wallet or a different wallet off the system. And I know the whole bit about it's transportable. You can't take your house to Europe, but you can take your Bitcoin or wherever you go. What would happen if we had some sort of an attack and they attacked the grid or whatever, and we had no power for a long time?
So your primary concern,
need to get to
your primary concern would be food and water at that point.
Yeah. So
society in general.
Life, but
Society in general stops if they care. But just to think about this, let's think about this from a logical standpoint, right? There are so many different grids all over the world, different countries controlled by different things. And then we've got all this energy that's off grid. A lot of Bitcoin mining now is off grid. It's hydroelectric. It's solar farms in the middle of nowhere. It's wind farms in the middle of nowhere. It's flare gas vents in the middle of nowhere, right? So plugged in satellites. Now you've got the whole atmosphere. You've got, I think Elon Musk has their Starlink. There's competitors. So even if you cut all the Comcast lines, the internet still goes on. There's towers. I mean, you can't shut all of these things down at the same time. It's in my opinion, impossible to do that, right?
Even if they knock out the
what?
Even if his things up in space.
Starlink.
Yes, they knock that out.
There's tens or hundreds of thousands.
There's 40,000 of them.
There's 40,000 of those, and they're going super fast around the world. At this hypersonic speed.
I've heard what happens if there's a worldwide EMP. It's like the dollar, like the paper dollars in your pocket in a couple days would be worthless.
Most valuable currency.
Well, your credit card wouldn't work, your debit card wouldn't work, your banks wouldn't open.
Right.
But let's explore this idea. Just say that everything went off. It's theoretically, I think it's impossible, but let's say the whole power went off in the whole world. You'd have to destroy all the solar panels, all the winds, everything. You have to get rid of natural gas and it would just disappear. Say a genie came out and just wiped everything away. I mean, the second power was restored, the blockchain would just stop. Okay? And then when power is restored, the blockchain would just start processing transactions again as the miners came back, right? That's essentially what would happen.
Well, that first 2,000 blocks would be pretty rough.
Yeah. It would have a slow start, but it would
be a very slow start.
Wasn't something able to transmit through CB radio or something along that?
Yeah.
Something
Ham radio.
ham radio?
No. Okay, any more questions for Aaron?
Anyone? Yeah, one more, and it might be kind of out there. But back in the late 70s, early 80s, these rich Texan oil producers named the Hunt brothers cornered the market on silver and basically caused the price of silver to go up to $50 an ounce way back then, which was like unbelievable. It almost shut down the whole stock market. It erupted things around the world. Do you see maybe one of these players like EFT that they could cause the price to drive up so fast by trying, because people sell when the price goes up, where they could actually corner the market on Bitcoin and then dump it? And maybe
So let me ask you a question. Who got left held in the bag when that all played out?
the citizens.
I'm pretty sure it was actually the people trying to corner the market. I'm pretty sure they got.
Well, they went to jail. Yeah,
Yeah.
but the government actually had to come in and you couldn't buy it.
Stole from trade.
You couldn't buy it on margin or anything that time. And I was, I wasn't really financially savvy at the time, but I knew it was quite an event for that time. And it was interesting how just two guys.
From what I remember, they ended up losing all their money. And,
They did.
People,
They did.
People just sold into the market, and a lot of people
They did.
basically they're the ones that are getting screwed, and a lot of people made a lot.
They almost made it work.
Does Aaron know anything about this?
No, I'm not familiar with this.
Oh, you're not, okay.
From my knowledge, they were the ones who ended up getting screwed, and a lot of people made a lot of money off of there. They basically destroyed their empire, what they had built, trying to do that. But on Bitcoin, it would be very hard to do something like that because everything is public on chain. So, like yesterday, Trump announced he wanted to keep all of the seed Bitcoin in a strategic reserve, right? And have a national Bitcoin, as a treasury reserve asset, right? That was the announcement at the Bitcoin conference. And then 2 days later, we see that the deep state actors, the Bitcoin starts to move on chain, right? And it's identified as the US government's wallet, right? So everybody gets the advantage of seeing in transparent watching what's happening, what's moving, all this fun about, they watch the German government do this. So everything is out in the open. Imagine if we had this transparency with, if we were on a Bitcoin standard and the government had to spend the Bitcoin, we could see where all these funds are going. We could see, hey, is all this money for all these forever wars is actually going? Where's it going? Is it, whose pockets it going to, right? So you could see all these things. Very, very, very interesting.
And then imagine the government actually had to justify their spending, right? And they couldn't just keep inflating the currency to the moon, right? Then they would really have to come up with a sound argument to win over the people's tax dollars. Right. Exactly. So this whole Bitcoin standard philosophy it removes the incentive for violence, and it's going to reshape our relationship with government where they are more like a business, where they compete for our tax dollars rather than just extorting us.
Yes.
Okay, last call, question.
Yes, since we are from Europe, how is Europe seeing Bitcoin? Because they want to implement CBDCs, are they seeing Bitcoin as a threat, or are they more friendly? Are they more acceptable nowadays after the ETFs especially?
So who's they? Yeah, Mr. Europe. In Europe? Yeah. In Europe, they're also working on CBDCs. The Dutch Central Bank, or from the Netherlands, they have a project going on with that. Are they unfriendly to Bitcoin? Was that part of your question?
Are they seeing Bitcoin as a threat for CBDCs, or are they more friendly?
I mean, at least publicly, they still sort of just don't take it seriously. So at least publicly, they don't see it as a threat. They just see it more as a joke. Yeah, it seems that way. Like what we were seeing here at the Bitcoin conference, that with all these politicians on stage talking about Bitcoin like that, I've not seen anything like that in Europe. In Europe, it's mostly still in the then they laugh at you stage, if you will. Yeah, for the most part. They are being strict with regulation. So, that's kind of the same here, right? But yeah, exchanges and
KYCs.
yeah, that sort of stuff, of course, that we're seeing a lot of that. And recently we had, so this is not Bitcoin related, this is Ethereum, was a privacy tool for Ethereum. The developers of that were, or at least one of them was found guilty.
Tornado Cash, right?
Tornado Cash.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think we've talked about that here.
Yeah, so the developers were building something that offered more privacy on Ethereum, and then the developer was found guilty of money laundering, essentially, which was definitely a new twist in the story, because so far it was assumed that if you if you write code, then you're not responsible for how people use that code. But now this developer was explicitly held responsible for that other people were using this code for money laundering. So we're seeing moves in that direction, anti-privacy moves, but generally, like sort of in a monetary sense, Bitcoin is more seen as a joke than as some sort of real competition.
You know, they saw our founding fathers as a joke too. So
Is there a
question?
Yeah, just to bring it back to the cypherpunks, like, was there one economic or political event that kind of riled up this group to get together back in the 80s or 90s? Was it a progression of anti-privacy events that kind of...
Well, they got back together, sort of. They found each other more on their own initiative, but shortly after the cypherpunks were founded, there was the first crypto war. I call it the first crypto war because we're kind of seeing the second one now with the rest. But there was a war on strong cryptography, or the U.S. government in particular. They banned the export of strong cryptography. So if you developed software, you could not export it. In other words, you could not publish it on the internet either. And the developer of PGP, Phil Zimmerman, he was not quite prosecuted, but investigated. There was also there was something called a Clipper chip. Is there anyone in this room that would still remember that, or was around?
Different studying it.
Yeah. The Clipper chip was a chip developed by the NSA, and they wanted Americans to have it in their phones. And it would encrypt their communication, but it would also have a backdoor for the NSA itself, so they could still listen into your communication. So the cypherpunks, they were founded before this happened, and it was under the Clinton administration this started, and they start to really fight back against this, for one, by creating these software tools, but also through other forms of activism. So Adam Back, for example, he had a shirt printed that had the PGP algorithm printed on it. This is the letter to code was printed on the t-shirt. And the idea was, if you wear this t-shirt and you leave the United States, then you're technically a weapons exporter. So it's sort of which was under the law true. So it was sort of to make the point of how absurd these laws were. And in the end, the cypherpunks won this battle. So it was also through pushback from big Silicon Valley companies who, their business was hurting because they couldn't export all their software, and human rights types of organizations like the ACLU. But also the cypherpunks with their actual hands-on activism, and eventually the U.S. government folded and dropped the case against Zimmerman and allowed strong, but it was taken off the munitions list.
Freedom of speech, right? Because it's code, it's what you're writing. So luckily here in the United States, we have laws on the books. We have the Constitution, and the Constitution protects us. So even 20, 30 years ago, you see the creeping of the deep state of all these agencies that just their whole mission, I guess, is just a violation, is a spit in the face of the founding fathers and the Constitution of this country, right? In a lot of ways, we've seen that. It's gotten worse. But these are just some examples from the previous generation of battles that were fought and won to push back these gross abuses of our personal liberties and rights, right? So Clipper chip is a great example, right? Cypherpunks won that battle, and I think they hacked that thing and showed how bad the government setup was. I mean, anybody could break. It was terrible. Encryption wasn't even strong. I think they broke it within like a day. It's like you pushed all this policy, done all this stuff, and you have your little back door, but now anybody can get into anybody's phone. It's just silly.
Okay, I think that's a wrap. So first of all, I want to let everybody know that most of us are going to the Yard House, or many of us are going to the Yard House after this, so you're welcome to join us. It's a restaurant just down south on 41, about a mile. So come on over and we can continue the conversation there. And then I also want to briefly introduce Mark here as another special guest. As you've heard people refer to Mark earlier, he's the president, right? President of Ocean Mining, which is a mining tool that you heard a little bit of discussion about. We recently found out that Mark spends a little time in the summer in Naples, so hopefully the next time you're here, we can have you be up here and be the special guest. But I want to give both of you an honorary Florida Bitcoin trucker. So let's give Aaron a big hand. The Genesis book, if you're interested, is on Amazon. Is there any other place that's better?
Audiobook version.
Bitcoin Magazine. Yes, you can buy it at the Bitcoin Magazine store.